My ex-husband just burned down the bakery my father-in-law left me because he could not stand that I inherited it. But he has absolutely no idea that the yellowed paternity test in my safe proves he is not even a Vance. I am writing this through tears that feel like acid on my face, shaking with a level of betrayal that physically hurts. For 20 years, I was the dutiful wife who cleaned up Mark's gambling messes and swallowed his mother's insults, convinced that if I just loved them enough, I could save this broken family. I was wrong. When Arthur died and chose me over his own son, they did not just get angry. They became predators. They gaslighted the entire community into hating me. They planted toxic chemicals in my kitchen to frame me. And finally, they lit a match to the legacy I spent my life building. They think they have won. They think I am just a weak, grieving widow who will fade away, but they do not know about the floorboards in the old office. I found the diary Arthur hid. I hold the proof that Mark is a fraud and Agnes is a liar. I have the power to send him to prison for arson and leave her homeless and disgraced. I am standing on the edge of destroying 3 lives, and my heart is ripped between mercy and vengeance. Is it wrong to feel this much hate for people I once called family? Everyone. I am terrified of what I am capable of right now. What should I do? They say scent is the strongest trigger for memory, the most unshakable tether to the past. For the last 20 years, I have smelled like yeast, burnt sugar, and vanilla extract. It settles into the pores of my skin, clings to the fibers of my sweaters, and follows me home like a loyal, exhausted dog. My name is Lucy Vance. I am 42 years old, and until this morning, I was defined by 2 things: being Mark Vance's wife and being the invisible pair of hands that kept the ovens running at Vance's Heritage Bakery. I live in Oakbridge, a suburb in upstate New York where the grass is legally required to be cut at exactly 2 inches, and the neighbors smile with their teeth but never their eyes. It is a place where reputation is currency, and a divorce is treated less like a tragedy and more like a contagious disease. I stood on the steps of the county courthouse, the wind whipping my coat around my legs. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, sealing away the last 6 months of legal warfare. In my hand, I clutched a thick envelope containing the final decree. It was done. The judge had ruled in my favor. I was officially a single woman, and more importantly, the sole owner of the bakery. Mark Vance walked out a moment later. I expected him to look defeated. I expected the rage that had punched holes in our drywall 3 years ago, or the pathetic sobbing he used whenever his gambling debts came to light. But Mark did not look defeated. He paused at the top of the stairs, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored navy suit that I knew he could not afford. He looked at me, and then he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knows a joke that you have not heard yet. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell the cloying scent of his cologne masking the faint odor of stale whiskey. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a smooth, theatrical whisper. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Lucy," he said, "you are just babysitting it for me." I watched him descend the stairs and slide into his least luxury sedan. He did not look back. My stomach churned, a cold knot tightening beneath my ribs. A normal man would be angry about losing the family business. A normal man would be worried about how he was going to pay rent without his wife's income. But Mark was not a normal man. His confidence felt wrong, like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a tornado touches down. I drove straight to the bakery. I needed the noise of the mixers, I needed the heat. Vance's heritage sat on the corner of Main Street, a brick institution that had stood there since 1955. My father-in-law, Arthur, had built it from the ground up. He was a good man, perhaps the only good man to ever carry the Vance name. When he passed away 4 years ago, the light went out of the building. Mark had wanted to sell it immediately to a condominium developer. I was the one who fought to keep it. I was the one who woke up at 3 in the morning every single day to feed the sourdough starter. I unlocked the back door and stepped into the kitchen. It was quiet, the heavy silence of the afternoon lull. My staff had gone home for the break between shifts. I walked to the office, Arthur's old office, and sat in his leather chair. The springs creaked, a familiar sound that usually brought me comfort. Today, it just made me feel exposed. Why had Mark smiled? I placed the court documents on the desk. They stated clearly that because Mark had contributed zero labor to the business for the last decade, and because Arthur's will had ambiguous language about merit over bloodline, the bakery was mine. It was a victory. I should have been opening a bottle of champagne. Instead, I was staring at the security monitor, watching the empty storefront, waiting for something to break. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against the wood. The screen lit up with a name that made my shoulders instinctively tense. Agnes Vance, my mother-in-law, or rather, my ex-mother-in-law. I let it ring 3 times. My therapist had told me to set boundaries. She had told me that no is a complete sentence, but 20 years of conditioning is not erased by a piece of paper from a judge. Agnes was 70 years old, a pillar of the local church, and a woman who could dismantle a person's self-esteem with a single compliment. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Agnes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Lucy, darling." Her voice flowed through the speaker, warm and thick like syrup over a razor blade. "I heard the news. The divorce is final. I suppose congratulations are in order for your Saotsing Haling. 2# is greater than freedom. Thank you." "Agnes," I said. I was about to hang up. "I am calling because we need to be civilized about this." She continued, not letting me speak. "We are not savages, Lucy. We are Vances. Well, you were a Vance. I am having a small dinner tonight, just a quiet family meal. Mark will be there. I want you to come." I gripped the phone tighter. "No, Agnes, I do not think that is a good idea." "Oh, stop it," she sighed, the sound of a disappointed mother dealing with a petulant toddler. "We have matters to discuss regarding the transition. You cannot just cut us off, Lucy. After everything we did for you, after we took you in when you had nothing, do it for Arthur. You know how much he hated conflict. The mention of Arthur was a low blow, and she knew it. She knew I worshipped the ground that man walked on. She knew I felt a debt to him that could never be repaid." Agnes was playing the widow card, the grieving matriarch trying to hold her fractured family together. If I refused, I would be the villain. I would be the heartless woman who took the family business and abandoned the lonely old widow. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to hang up, lock the doors, and go home to my empty apartment. But then the savior complex kicked in, that fatal flaw that had kept me married to her lazy son for 2 decades. I thought I could fix things. I thought if I was just polite enough, calm enough, and generous enough, they would eventually treat me with respect. I wanted to prove that I was taking the high road. "Fine," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. What time? 7 o'clock. Do not be late. Dear, and dress nice. We have a guest. The line went dead before I could ask who the guest was. I sat there for a long time as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the bakery floor. I looked at the reflection of myself in the darkened window. I saw a woman who looked tired, a woman who looked older than 42. Mark's smile at the courthouse flashed in my mind again. He knew I would say yes. They knew exactly which buttons to push because they were the ones who had installed them. I stood up and smoothed down my apron, though I was not wearing one. It was a phantom sensation. I walked out to the front display case to check the stock for tomorrow. The lemon tarts were perfectly aligned. The croissants were flaky and golden. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked orderly. But as I reached in to rearrange a tray of cookies, I noticed something small on the floor, near the entrance. It was a cigarette butt. I frowned. No one on my staff smoked. I had a strict policy. I walked over and picked it up. It was expensive. A slim, white filter with a distinct lipstick stain on the rim. A bright, aggressive shade of fuchsia. I did not wear lipstick, and Agnes only wore pale pink. I crushed the cigarette butt in my palm, the ash smearing against my skin. Someone had been here. Someone had been standing inside my locked bakery before I arrived, watching, waiting, and marking their territory. The sense of peace I had fought for in court dissolved instantly. The bakery did not feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a stage, and the curtains were about to go up on a play I had not rehearsed for. I locked the front door, double-checking the deadbolt. I turned off the lights, plunging the shop into darkness. But as I walked to my car, the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck was so intense that I almost dropped my keys. I was going to dinner at the Lion's Den, armed with nothing but good intentions and a broken heart. I had no idea that by the time dessert was served, my life would be set on fire. The Vance estate sat on a hill overlooking the town, a sprawling colonial revival that was too big for 3 people and far too quiet for a home. As I pulled my sedan up the winding driveway, the headlights swept across the manicured hedges that stood like silent sentries. The house loomed against the night sky, its windows glowing with a warm, deceptive amber light. To an outsider, it looked like a postcard of American prosperity. To me, it looked like a mausoleum. I parked my car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked composed. I looked like a successful business owner. I did not look like a woman walking to her execution. Agnes opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a cashmere sweater in a soft shade of cream and a string of pearls that I knew cost more than my entire year of rent. "Lucy," she said, her voice breathless, as if she had been anxiously awaiting my arrival. "You look tired, dear. The stress of the trial. I imagine. Come in out of the cold." She leaned in to kiss my cheek. Her skin smelled of lavender and old money. It was the same scent that had comforted me when I lost my own parents. The same scent that had welcomed me into the family 20 years ago. For a fleeting second, I wanted to lean into her, to let her be the mother figure I desperately missed. But then she pulled back, and her eyes scanned my outfit with a critical precision that felt like a physical pat-down. "Store-bought," she murmured, her gaze lingering on the hem of my skirt. "Well, thrift is a virtue, I suppose." She led me down the hallway. The house had not changed since Arthur died, yet it felt entirely different. The warmth was gone. The photographs on the wall seemed to stare at me with accusation. We entered the dining room, and the air left my lungs. Mark was sitting at the head of the table, Arthur's seat. He was swirling a glass of red wine, his posture relaxed, arrogant. But he was not alone. Sitting to his right was a young woman I had never met. Though I recognized the type immediately, she could not have been more than 25. She had bleach blonde hair, teased into high volume, and was wearing a tight, leopard print dress that seemed aggressively inappropriate for a family dinner. But what froze my blood was not her dress. It was the way her hand rested possessively on her stomach, rubbing the slight, rounded protrusion there in slow, circular motions, and on the rim of her wine glass, clearly visible against the crystal, was a smear of bright fuchsia lipstick, the same shade I had found on the cigarette butt in my bakery. "Lucy," Mark said, not bothering to stand up, "this is Tiffany." Tiffany looked up at me and popped a piece of gum in her mouth. Her eyes were heavily lined with black makeup, and she looked me up and down with a smirk that suggested she knew everything about me. And none of it was good. "Hi," she said, dragging out the vowel. "So, you are the ex. Mark talks about you all the time. He says you make great cookies." Agnes breezed past me and took her seat. "Sit down." "Lucy, dinner is served." I moved to my usual chair, but Agnes cleared her throat. "No, dear," she said, pointing to the guest chair at the far end of the table, away from the family. "That seat is for Tiffany now. She needs to be close to Mark. You can sit over there." I sat in the exile seat. The maid brought out the roast beef, carving it in silence. The sound of silverware scraping against fine china filled the room. A sharp, dissonant music that made my teeth ache. I could not eat. I stared at the meat on my plate, watching the red juices pool around the potatoes. "So," Mark said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "we should skip the small talk. Tiffany gets tired easily these days. The doctor says she needs rest." Agnes beamed at the young woman, a look of adoration I had never received in 2 decades. "We are just so blessed. A new generation of Vance. A boy, the ultrasound says." Arthur would have been so proud to see his name carried on. The words hit me like a physical blow. A boy, an heir. I had tried for years to give Mark a child. We had spent thousands of dollars on doctors and treatments, only to be told that it was simply not meant to be. Mark had blamed me. Agnes had pitied me. And now, this girl, this stranger with fuchsia lipstick, had accomplished in a few months what I had failed to do in a lifetime. "Congratulations," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. "Thank you," Tiffany said, reaching over to squeeze Mark's hand on the table. "We are naming him Arthur. Mark thinks it is only right." I felt bile rise in my throat. They were going to name this child after the man whose legacy they had tried to sell for condo money. "That brings us to why you are here." "Lucy," Agnes said, her tone shifting. She set down her fork and folded her hands on the table. She looked at me with the cold, dead eyes of a shark. "We need to discuss the bakery." "I own the bakery, Agnes," I said, trying to summon the strength I had felt in the courtroom. The judge ruled, "Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling, R. Jing Hao Da Yu." The judge is a government employee who does not understand family. Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "That bakery is Vance's heritage. My father built it. My name is on the sign, and you ran it into the ground until I took over." I shot back. The inner monologue in my head was screaming at me to stop, to be polite, to de-escalate. but the sight of Tiffany rubbing her belly was igniting something volatile inside me. "Lucy, please," Agnes said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do not be hysterical. We are making you a generous offer. We want the bakery back. It will be Mark's wedding gift to Tiffany, and a trust for little Arthur. It is only fair. The business belongs to the bloodline." "And in exchange?" I asked. Looking between the three of them, Mark smirked. "We are willing to let you stay on as the manager. You know the recipes. You know the staff. We will pay you a salary. A fair one. You do not have the head for business ownership. Lucy, you never did. You are a worker bee. We are offering you security. They wanted me to work for them. They wanted me to be a servant in the kingdom I had saved. The audacity was so immense, so suffocating, that for a moment I could not breathe. I looked at Tiffany. She was inspecting her manicure. Bored. She did not care about the bakery. She did not know the difference between bread flour and pastry flour. She just wanted the title. She wanted the power. "I cannot do that," I said quietly. "I will not sign it over." Agnes's face hardened. The mask of the benevolent matriarch cracked, revealing the venom beneath. "You are being selfish, Lucy, just like you were when you refused to give Mark the money for his investments. You always hold him back, and now you want to steal his birthright. You are an outsider. You have always been an outsider. We took you in. We gave you a name. And this is how you repay us? By taking food out of the mouth of an innocent baby?" The guilt washed over me, hot and shameful. Was I being selfish? Was I stealing from a child? My savior complex, that deep-seated need to be the good person, to fix the broken things, began to war with my logic. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just the caretaker. "No," I said, standing up. My legs felt weak. Arthur left it to me. He left it to me because he knew I would protect it. Mark laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He was senile. "Lucy," he was an old man on heavy medication. "You manipulated him. Everyone knows it." I grabbed my purse. I could not stay here another second. The walls were closing in. I felt like I was being gaslighted by a professional team. "I am leaving," I said. Agnes did not stand up. She picked up her wine glass and took a slow sip, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim. "Go ahead. Run away," she said softly. "But this is not over. Lucy, you have the paper, but we have the town. We have the community. Do you really think you can operate that business without the Vance family's blessing? You will crumble. And when you do, we will be here to pick up the pieces." I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. I heard Tiffany giggle as I left. "Babe," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "Do you think she is going to cry?" I burst out the front door and into the cold night air. I fumbled for my car keys, dropping them on the gravel driveway. As I scrambled to pick them up, I looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see them toasting. They looked like a perfect, happy family, and I was the monster who was trying to destroy them. I drove away, tears blurring my vision. I thought the divorce was the end of the war, but as I sped down the dark, winding road back to my empty apartment, I realized with a sickening clarity that the war had not even begun. They were not going to let me go. They were going to come for everything. And the terrifying part was, a small, broken voice inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, I deserved it. The sound of a heart monitor is a rhythm that stays with you long after the machine has been turned off. It is a sterila, mechanical metronome that counts down the seconds of a life. Indifferent to the tears falling onto the hospital sheets, I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. But my mind was 3 years in the past. I was back in the palliative care unit at St. Jude's Hospital. The room had smelled of antiseptic and wilting lilies. Arthur Vance lay in the bed, his body shrunken, his skin the color of parchment paper. The man who had kneading dough with forearms like tree trunks was gone, replaced by a frail ghost. I remembered sitting beside him, holding a hand that felt like a bundle of dry twigs. Mark had been absent. Of course, he was supposedly parking the car, a task that had taken him 2 hours. Agnes was in the hallway, loudly berating a nurse about the quality of the coffee. It was just Arthur and me. He had opened his eyes, the blue irises cloudy with cataracts, but sharp with urgency. He pulled his hand from mine and reached under his pillow. His fingers, trembling violently, withdrew a small, heavy brass key. It was not the key to the bakery front door. It was an old skeleton key, tarnished and cold. "Take it," he had wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "What is this for?" "Arthur?" I had asked, trying to close his fingers back around it. "The safe," he whispered. "The one in the floorboards, under the rug in the office. You know the one." I nodded. I knew it existed, but I had never seen it opened. Arthur was a private man. "Do not give it to them." "Lucy," he said, squeezing my hand with a sudden, surprising strength. "Promise me, not to Mark, not to Agnes, only you. You are the only one with the hands for the dough. You are the only one who respects the rise. I promise," I said, thinking he was delirious with pain medication. I thought he was talking about the recipes, the secret blend of spices for the pumpkin loaf or the hydration percentage for the sourdough. "No," he gasped, his eyes widening. "It is not about the bread, Lucy. It is the truth. The truth is heavy. Can you carry it?" Before I could ask what he meant, the monitor's steady beep accelerated into a high-pitched whine. The nurses rushed in. The moment was severed. Arthur died 10 minutes later, taking his secrets into the void, leaving me with a brass key and a heavy, unexplained burden. I sat up in my bed, shaking off the memory. The morning sun was slicing through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across my duvet. My head pounded. The confrontation at dinner last night had left a hangover worse than cheap wine. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, intending to check the time. Instead, I saw a barrage of notifications, text messages from neighbors, alerts from the Oakbridge Community Alliance app, a dozen missed calls from my head baker, Sarah. My stomach dropped. I opened the community app first. At the top of the feed, pinned by the moderators, was a post from Mark Vance. It had been posted at 3 a.m. The title read, "A Son's Heartbreak, the Truth About Vance's Heritage." I read the words, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "To my friends and neighbors in Oakbridge," Mark wrote, "it is with a heavy heart that I share a private family tragedy. As you know, my father, Arthur Vance, was the soul of this town. When he was on his deathbed, confused and heavily medicated, he was coerced into signing changes to his will. We stayed silent to protect his dignity. But now, as I watch my ex-wife, Lucy, evict my elderly mother and attempt to erase the Vance legacy to fund her own lifestyle, I can no longer stay silent. She has stolen our family business. She has taken advantage of a dying man's dementia. Please do not support a business built on deception. We just want our heritage back. There were over 200 comments. This is disgusting, wrote Mrs. Gable from down the street. I always thought there was something cold about her. Boycott Vance's, wrote another. Justice for Arthur. I saw her yelling at Agnes once. A third person lied. She is unstable. I dropped the phone on the mattress as if it were burning hot. Gaslighting. It was pure, unadulterated gaslighting on a public scale. Mark, who had not visited his father for the last month of his life, was rewriting history. He was painting me as the villain, the predator, the gold digger. I needed to get to the bakery. I needed to show my face. If I hid, I was guilty. I dressed in 5 minutes, throwing on a white blouse and dark trousers. I did not bother with makeup. I grabbed my keys and drove to the shop, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I pulled up to the bakery, my heart stopped. The lights were already on. The open sign was flipped. Even though it was only 7 in the morning and we did not open until 8, I parked the car crookedly and ran to the door. I pushed it open, the familiar bell jingling above my head, but the scene inside was a nightmare. Music was blasting, terrible, thumping pop music that had no place in an artisan bakery. The display case, usually a meticulous arrangement of pastries, was a mess. Croissants were piled haphazardly on top of muffins. Cookies were broken, and there, standing behind the counter, was Tiffany. She was wearing a vintage apron that had belonged to Arthur's wife, an apron I kept preserved in a glass case in the back. She had broken the glass to get it. Underneath, she wore a tight tank top and jeans. Her hair was loose, strands of bleach blonde falling dangerously close to the food. She was eating a cannoli, crumbs falling from her mouth onto the counter. "Hey, landlord," she shouted over the music, waving the half-eaten pastry at me. "You are late." My staff, Sarah and young Ben, were huddled in the corner by the espresso machine. Looking terrified, Ben was holding a broom like a weapon. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the bass of the music. I marched over and yanked the power cord of the stereo from the wall. The silence that followed was ringing. "I am managing," Tiffany said, licking cream off her thumb. "Mark said I should come in and get a feel for the place. You know, since I am the new face of the brand, get out," I said. I was trembling, not with fear, but with a rage so white-hot it felt like I had swallowed a coal. "Take that apron off and get out of my bakery." Tiffany laughed. It was a cruel, childish sound. "Or what? You are going to call the police? And tell them what? That the mother of the Vance heir is trying to help?" Mark already called the cops. By the way, he told them, "You might cause a scene. They are on our side." Switty. Mark plays poker with the sheriff. She walked around the counter, stepping into the customer area. She looked around with a sneer. "This place is a dump. Anyway," she said, "Mark says we should turn it into a bistro, or maybe a vape shop, something that actually makes money." She walked over to a table and ran a finger through the dust. Dust that was only there because she had likely fired the cleaning crew. As Sarah mouthed to me from the corner, I looked at Sarah. "Are you okay?" "She fired us," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "She came in with a key. I do not know how she got a key, and told us to leave. We stayed because we were waiting for you. She had a key. Mark must have kept a copy from years ago." I turned back to Tiffany. You cannot fire them. You do not own this place. And you are trespassing. Tiffany Sehill. A dramatic, bored exhale. She leaned against a display of artisan jams, knocking a jar of raspberry preserve to the floor. It shattered, red jam splattering like blood across the white tiles. "Oops," she said, deadpan. Then she stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. The smell of her cheap perfume was suffocating. "Listen, Lucy," she hissed, her voice dropping the Valley Girl act for a moment. "Just sign the papers. Mark does not want the bakery. He hates this place. He hates the smell of yeast. He hates the early mornings." "Then why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why is he doing this?" Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Because he owes $40,000 to a bookie in Atlantic City. You idiot. And another $20,000 to the Internal Revenue Service. He needs to sell the building. He has a buyer lined up, a developer who wants to knock this dusty old shack down and build luxury condos." The world tilted on its axis. It was not about legacy. It was not about little Arthur. It was not about the Vance name. It was about gambling debts. Mark was going to sell Arthur's life work. The place where he had taught me to braid challah. The place where he had hidden from his unhappy marriage. The place that was the heart of this town. To pay off a bookie. He was going to bulldoze it. The realization hit me harder than the divorce. For years, I had told myself that Mark, despite his flaws, loved his family history. I had told myself that Agnes, for all her cruelty, wanted to preserve the name. It was all a lie. They were parasites. They were willing to burn everything down to keep their lifestyle afloat. "So you are just going to let him destroy it?" I asked Tiffany. "For money?" Tiffany shrugged. "I get a cut. I need a new car. And babies are expensive." She looked down at the shattered jam jar. "You should clean that up, Lucy. It is a safety hazard. And smile for the cameras." She pointed to the corner. I looked up. The security camera red light was blinking. But then I noticed something else. Tiffany was holding her phone, recording me. "Say hi to the internet," she chirped. "I am live streaming." Title: Crazy Ex-Wife Threatens Pregnant Woman. I froze. If I screamed, if I threw her out, if I did anything, she would use it. I was trapped. I took a deep breath. I looked at Sarah and Ben. "Go home," I said softly. "Take the day off. I will pay you." "But Lucy," Soiting Haling. 2 hashes greater than Sarah started. "Go," I commanded. They hurried out the back door. I was alone with Tiffany. "I am not signing," I said, my voice steady now, cold as the marble countertop. "Get out of my shop, Tiffany, or I will call the health department and report an unauthorized person with no food safety certification handling product. That is a fine of $5,000. Does Mark have $5,000 right now?" Tiffany's smile faltered. She knew about the debts. She knew they were broke. She sneered, ripping the apron off and throwing it onto the floor, right into the puddle of jam. "You are pathetic," she spat. "Enjoy your dough, Lucy. We are coming for you, and next time, we will not be this nice." She stormed out, the bell jingling cheerfully behind her. I locked the door. I flipped the sign to closed. I sank to the floor, right next to the broken jar and the ruined apron. I picked up the fabric. It was stained red, sticky and ruined. Arthur's warning in the hospital came back to me. It is not about the bread. It is the truth. Sao Yu Ting Haling. 2 hash is greater than the safe. I scrambled to my feet. I ran to the back office. I shoved the heavy oak desk aside, the legs screeching against the wood floor. I threw aside the Persian rug that had been there for 40 years. There, in the corner, was a loose floorboard. I pried it up with a letter opener. Underneath, nestled in a bed of insulation, was a small, gray metal safe. I pulled the brass key from around my neck. I had worn it on a chain since the day Arthur died. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than. It clicked. I opened the lid. Inside was a leather-bound notebook and a thick, yellowed envelope. I opened the notebook first. It was Arthur's handwriting, September 24th, 1982. The first entry read, "I found the letters today. Agnes has been seeing him for a year. She thinks I do not know. She thinks I am stupid. But I know, and I know the boy she is carrying is not mine." I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. I opened the yellow envelope. It contained a paternity test result from a clinic in Boston, dated 30 years ago. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Mark was not a Vance. He had no claim. He had no blood right. The entire foundation of their argument, the entire platform of their moral superiority, was a lie. I looked at the camera monitor. The shop was empty. The town outside believed I was a thief. But in this dark, dusty office, holding a piece of paper that could destroy 3 lives, I realized something terrifying. I was not the victim anymore. I was the executioner. But as I held the proof, a chill ran down my spine. If they were willing to destroy the bakery for money, what would they do to me if they knew I had this? I was not just fighting for a building. I was fighting a family that had been living a lie for 3 decades. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. The television in my living room was an old model, one that Arthur had given us when he upgraded to a flat screen years ago. The picture was slightly grainy, but the image of Agnes Vance was crystal clear. She sat on a beige sofa in the studio of Channel 8 local news, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was wearing black, a mourning color she had not even worn to Arthur's funeral, and a single diamond brooch pinned to her lapel. The lower third of the screen read, "Widow claims daughter-in-law stole family legacy." I sat on the edge of my couch, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in my hand. I watched as the reporter, a woman named Linda with overly hair-sprayed blonde curls, leaned in with sympathetic eyes. "So, tell us, Mrs. Vance," Linda said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. "How did this happen?" Vance's heritage has been a staple of Oakbridge for decades. Agnes dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "It is just heartbreaking. Linda, my late husband, Arthur, he was a trusting soul. He loved everyone. When Lucy came to us, she had nothing. We took her in. We treated her like a daughter. And in his final days, when his mind was wandering, Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling, 2 hash is greater than well. She was the only one allowed in the room." The camera zoomed in on Agnes's face. She looked frail, a masterclass in deception. "We just want to preserve the history," Agnes continued, her voice breaking perfectly. "My son, Mark, grew up in that bakery. He learned to walk between the flour sacks, and now his ex-wife wants to turn it into something else. She has banned us from the premises. She even threatened my pregnant daughter-in-law yesterday. We are just Sao Yu Tsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than we are devastated." I threw the remote control at the wall. It shattered, batteries skittering across the hardwood floor. But the voice of the television kept going. I felt like I was drowning on dry land. The narrative was being spun so fast, so efficiently, that I could barely catch my breath. Agnes was not just lying. She was weaponizing her age and her status to dismantle my life. My phone started ringing again. It was not a notification this time. It was a call from the bakery landline. I picked it up, my hand trembling. Saúde Ting Hao, Ling, due cancelletto e maggiore di hello. Lucy. It is Sarah, my head baker whispered. You need to come down here. Now. I drove to the bakery in a daze. The drive usually took 10 minutes. Today, it felt like running a gauntlet. As I stopped at a red light, a woman in the car next to me recognized me. She did not wave. She glared, shaking her head with a look of pure disgust, then turned away to say something to her passenger. The judgment was palpable, hanging in the air like smog. When I arrived at Vance's Heritage, I saw why Sarah had called. The front window, the large plate glass pane that displayed our wedding cakes, was shattered. A brick lay in the middle of the shop floor, surrounded by a glittering sea of glass shards. Spray painted across the brick facade in jagged red letters was one word: thief. I stepped through the broken door, the glass crunching under my boots. The wind blew through the hole, carrying dead leaves and the sound of traffic into the once quiet sanctuary. Sarah was sweeping, tears streaming down her face. Ben was trying to scrub the paint off the brick with a wire brush, his movements angry and jerky. I am so sorry. Lucy, Sarah sobbed. We found it like this when we came in to prep the sourdough. I stood there, staring at the brick. It was a standard red construction brick, heavy and rough. It could have killed someone. Call the police, I said, my voice flat. We did, Ben said, not looking up. Deputy Miller came by. He took a report. He said it looks like random vandalism. He said without camera footage of the actual throw, there is not much they can do. Of course, Mark played poker with the sheriff, and the camera system had been conveniently blind to the exterior since the power surge last week. Another accident I now suspected was sabotage, but the vandalism was only the first wave. An hour later, a white government sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a gray suit stepped out, carrying a clipboard. He did not look like a customer. He looked like a bureaucrat on a mission. Miss Vance? He asked as he stepped over the broken glass. Saúde Ting Hao, Ling. Qu'es-tu? Yes, I am Inspector Davis from the County Health Department. We received multiple anonymous complaints this morning regarding a rodent infestation and the use of expired dairy products. I need to inspect the premises immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rodents? We had the cleanest kitchen in the county. I scrubbed the floors myself every night. This is a mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We have never had a violation. This is retaliation. My ex-husband, Saúde Ting Hao Liang, Ting Hao Da Yu. I am not interested in your personal drama. Ms. Vance, Inspector Davis cut me off. I am interested in public safety. Step aside. He spent 2 hours in my kitchen. He checked the temperature of the walk-in fridge 3 times. He moved every sack of flour. He ran his white-gloved finger under the heavy mixers. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. But then, he reached into the back of the dry storage pantry, behind a stack of unused cake boxes, an area I had cleaned yesterday. He pulled out a small, open container of rat poison. It was a brand I had never bought. It was placed in a spot where it could easily contaminate the food packaging. "This is a critical violation," he said, his eyes cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Unsecured toxic substances in a food prep area." I stared at the box. "I did not put that there," I whispered. "Someone planted it. Tiffany was here yesterday. She was back there." Inspector Davis clicked his pen and began writing on a pink carbon copy form. "I am issuing an immediate cease and desist order," he said. "You are to close operations until a follow-up inspection can be scheduled and a remediation plan is filed. That will take at least 7 business days." 7 days. We had a wedding cake due on Saturday. We had wholesale orders for 3 coffee shops. 7 days of closure would bankrupt me. It would kill the cash flow I needed to pay the lawyers. "You cannot do this," I pleaded, feeling the tears prick my eyes. "This is a setup. Please, just look at the rest of the kitchen. It is spotless. Sign here," he said, thrusting the clipboard at me, "or I call the police to enforce the closure." I signed. The pen tore through the thin paper. He taped a bright orange, "Closed by order of health department" sign to the front door, right next to the shattered glass. It was a scarlet letter. It was a billboard telling the entire town that Agnes was right. I was incompetent. I was dirty. And I was ruining the Vance legacy. I sent Sarah and Ben home again. This time, I could not promise I would be able to pay them. I sat on the floor of the darkened bakery, the orange light from the street lamp outside filtering through the notice on the door. The bakery was cold. The ovens were off. The yeast in the proofing bowls would die by morning. I pulled my knees to my chest. The isolation was absolute. The community I had served for 20 years had turned its back on me in less than 24 hours. They believed the tears of a well-dressed widow over the sweat of the woman who baked their bread. My inner voice, usually my source of resilience, began to whisper treacherous things. Maybe Agnes is right. It said, "Look at this mess. You brought this here. If you had just given them the bakery, none of this would be happening. Sarah would still have a job. The window would be whole. You are destroying everything Arthur built just to soothe your own ego." I looked at the office door. The safe was back under the floorboards, holding the secret that could blow them all apart. Mark was not a Vance, but what good was the truth if no one would listen? What good was a piece of paper against a town that had already decided I was the villain? I felt a crack in my resolve, a deep, jagged fissure. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired. I thought about calling Mark. I thought about surrendering. I could just sign the papers. I could take the settlement money, move to another state, and disappear. I could stop the pain. I reached for my phone. I pulled up Mark's contact. My thumb hovered over the call button. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a picture. It was a photo of me, taken through the front window of the bakery just minutes ago. I was sitting on the floor, head in my hands, looking broken. The caption read, "Looks like the trash is finally taking itself out." I dropped the phone. They were watching me. Right now, the fear that had been paralyzing me suddenly shifted. It curdled. It hardened. They were enjoying this. They were not just trying to win. They were trying to break me for sport. I looked at the orange sign on the door. I looked at the brick. I did not call Mark. I stood up. I walked to the back, to the utility sink, and washed my face with freezing cold water. The shock made me gasp. I was spiraling. Yes, but I had hit the bottom of the well. And when you hit the bottom, There is only one direction left to go. I was going to climb out, and I was going to drag them down into the dark with me. The silence in a bakery is supposed to be peaceful. It is supposed to be the quiet before the dawn, the heavy, expectant stillness of dough rising in the dark. But the silence inside Vance's heritage that morning was not peaceful. It was dead. I stood in front of the wall of industrial ovens, the heart of the entire operation. They should have been roaring with heat, radiating the 400 degrees necessary to bake the 3-tiered sponge cake for the mayor's daughter. Instead, they were cold, stone cold. I pressed the ignition button for the 10th time. Nothing, not even a click. The repairman, a guy named Mike who had serviced these machines since Arthur was alive, wiped grease from his hands with a dirty rag. He did not look me in the eye. "It is not a fuse, Lucy," Mike said, his voice low. "The main gas line feeding the unit has been severed. And the digital control board? It looks like someone took a hammer to it. This was not a power surge. This was deliberate." I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my extremities numb. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling, where the security camera blinked its red eye. Mike followed my gaze. "I already checked," he said. "The lens has been sprayed over with black paint. Whoever did this knew exactly where to stand." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would break me. "To replace the board and repipe the gas, Mike said, $6,000, maybe $7, and I have to order the parts from Germany. It will take 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I leaned against the stainless steel prep table, feeling the cold metal seep through my shirt. 2 weeks meant canceling the mayor's order. 2 weeks meant refunding $3,000 in deposits I had already spent on payroll. 2 weeks meant the death of the business. I thanked Mike and locked the door behind him. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The smell of raw, unbaked flour hung in the air, mocking me. It was the smell of failure. I was done. The fight had left me. I had the DNA test in the safe. Yes, but what good was a piece of paper when I was bankrupt? I could not afford a lawyer to present it. I could not afford to keep the lights on. They had won. Agnes and Mark had successfully besieged my life until I starved. A knock on the glass front door made me flinch. I did not want to answer it. I wanted to crawl into the unheated oven and hide, but the knocking persisted. Rhythmic and confident, I stood up and walked to the front. Mark was standing there. He was not smiling this time. He looked concerned. He was wearing a soft gray sweater and holding 2 coffees. He looked like the man I had married 20 years ago, before the gambling, before the bitterness. He looked like a lifeline. I unlocked the door. "I heard about the ovens," he said softly, stepping inside without asking. "Word travels fast in this town. Mike's wife talks to my mother." I took the coffee he offered. It was warm, and my hands were freezing. "What do you want?" "Mark, I want to help," he said. He pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. "Look around you, Lucy. This place, Saojingha Ling, 2# is greater than it is killing you. You look exhausted. You have lost weight. The town is against you. The equipment is broken. How much more can you take?" I stared into the black coffee. "I do not know," I whispered. Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the table between us. He smoothed it out with his palm. "I have a buyer," he said. "A private equity firm. They want the location. They are willing to pay off all the debts, the mortgage, the repair bills, the refund for the mayor's cake, everything, plus $50,000 cash for you to start over. $50,000. It was enough to move away, enough to rent a small apartment in a city where no one knew my name. All you have to do is sign, Mark said, pushing a pen toward me. I convinced them to keep the name. It will still be Vance's heritage. My mother is happy with the deal. Tiffany is happy. We can all just Howling. 2 hash is greater than move on. No more fighting. No more courts. Just peace. Peace. The word sounded like a lullaby. I picked up the pen. My hand was trembling. Mark watched me, his eyes intense, focused on the tip of the pen. He was leaning forward slightly, his breath held. I looked at the paper. It was a standard transfer of deed. It looked so simple, just a signature, and the nightmare would end. I touched the pen to the paper. The ink bled a tiny black dot onto the white page. Go on, Luch, Mark whispered. Do it for yourself. You were never meant for this stress. You are a baker, not a fighter. His voice was soothing, but something about the nickname Luce made me pause. He had not called me that in years. He only used it when he wanted money. I looked up at him. I looked at his eyes. They were not sympathetic. They were hungry. He was looking at the paper like a starving dog looks at a bone. There was a glint of triumph in his pupils, a spark of absolute, arrogant victory. He thought I was weak. He thought I was the same woman who had bailed him out of debt 3 times. The woman who apologized when he cheated. My gaze drifted past him to the wall behind the counter. There, hanging slightly crooked, was a framed black and white photograph of Arthur on the day he opened the bakery in 1955. He was covered in flour, smiling with a pride that illuminated the grain of the photo. You are the only one with the hands for the dough, he had said. The truth is heavy. Can you carry it? If I signed this paper, I was not just selling a building. I was selling Arthur. I was letting a man who shared 0 DNA with him sell his legacy to a faceless corporation so he could pay off a gambling debt. I looked back at the document. The clause at the bottom caught my eye. Seller agrees to a non-disclosure agreement regarding all family matters. They wanted to buy my silence. They knew I had something, or they feared I might find something. This was not a rescue mission. This was a hush money payment. The fog in my brain cleared. The exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I gripped the pen tighter. Mark smiled, thinking I was bracing myself to write. I drove the pen down, but not onto the signature line. I drove it through the paper, stabbing it into the wooden table. Mark jumped back, knocking his coffee over. What the hell are you doing? I am declining your offer, I said. My voice did not shake. Lucy, do not be an idiot. Mark snarled, his mask of kindness slipping instantly. You have nothing. You have broken ovens and a ruined reputation. You are going to lose this place anyway. Take the money and get out. No, I said. I stood up. I picked up the document, ripped it in half, and then in half again. I let the pieces flutter down onto the puddle of spilled coffee. I am not signing, Mark, and I am not selling. Not to you, not to your equity firm, not to God himself. Mark stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. You are making a mistake, a massive mistake. You think you can win? My mother will bury you. I will bury you. I walked to the door and opened it. The cold air rushed in, bracing and clean. Get out, I said. Mark walked to the door, stepping close to me. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. You are going to regret this, he has said. You are going to wish you had taken the money. When we are done with you, there will be nothing left but ash." He stormed out to his car. I slammed the door and locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass. He was right about one thing. There might be ash, but it would not be mine. I turned back to the silent, broken bakery. I did not have ovens. I did not have money. But for the first time in 20 years, I had my spine. I walked to the back office. I pulled the rug aside. I checked the safe. The DNA test was still there. I was not going to use it yet. Not when I was on the defensive. I needed to lure them in deeper. I needed them to commit a crime so undeniable that even their social status could not save them. Mark had threatened Ash. It was a specific threat. I looked at the smoke detectors on the ceiling. They were old. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the insurance company to update my policy. Then I called a 24-hour security firm. If they wanted war, I would give them a war, but I would not fight it on the battlefield they expected. I sat in Arthur's chair and waited for the night to fall. The victim was dead. The survivor had just woken up. 3 o'clock in the morning is the hour of the wolf. It is the time when the world is darkest, when the body is weakest, and when nightmares tend to bleed into reality. I was sitting in my car, parked across the street from the bakery, keeping a vigil I had promised myself I would maintain. But exhaustion is a heavy tide. My eyelids had grown heavy, and I had drifted into a shallow, restless sleep behind the wheel. I woke up to the sound of glass shattering. It was not the tinkling sound of a dropped cup. It was a violent, explosive crash that echoed through the empty street. I sat up, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then I saw the glow. It started in the rear storage warehouse, where we kept the sacks of flour and sugar in the baking world. Everyone knows that flour dust is combustible. Suspended in the air, it is more explosive than gunpowder. A ball of orange fire rolled out of the back window, licking up the brick wall. "No," I whispered, fumbling for the door handle. "No, no, no." I scrambled out of the car. The heat hit me instantly from 50 feet away. A physical wall of pressure. I ran toward the building, screaming for help. Though the street was deserted, I dialed 911 as I ran, my fingers slipping on the screen. The fire was moving with terrifying speed. It was not a natural fire. It was hungry. It was fueled. The flames were not just orange. They were streaked with blue and chemical green, the sign of accelerants. Vance's heritage was burning. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the front display window, the one that had been smashed and boarded up, blew out completely. A tongue of flame shot out like a dragon's breath, scorching the awning that Arthur had installed 40 years ago. I tried to get closer. My mind was racing to the back office. The safe, the proof. I had put it back under the floorboards for safekeeping, thinking it was the most secure place. I had been a fool. The sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder, piercing the crackling roar of the fire. I stood on the curb, helpless. I watched the gold lettering of my name, the name Arthur had given me, curl and blacken and peel away from the wood. I watched the roof over the main kitchen collapse inward with a sound like a dying beast. Sparks shot up into the night sky, looking like perverse fireworks. A firefighter grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Ma'am, you have to stay back," he shouted over the roar. "My father is in there," I screamed, knowing it made no sense, knowing Arthur was dead, but feeling like he was dying all over again. The bakery was him. His soul was in the rafters, in the yeast, in the very bricks, and they were burning him. I watched for 3 hours. I watched the water from the hoses hit the flames, turning into thick, black steam. I watched the building that had been my sanctuary turn into a skeleton. The smell was not just smoke. It was the smell of burnt sugar, scorched cinnamon, and the acrid stench of gasoline. Mark had promised ash. He had delivered. By dawn, the fire was out. The bakery was a smoking ruin. The roof was gone. The front wall was a jagged set of teeth. The floor was a swamp of black water and charcoal. The fire chief, a man I had known since high school, it walked over to me. He took off his helmet, his face streaked with soot. "I am sorry, Lucy," he said quietly. "It looks like total loss." And Lucy, Saoyitsing Haling, 2 hashes greater than it looks like arson. We found remnants of canisters in the back alley. I nodded. I felt nothing. The grief had burned out with the fire, leaving only a cold, hard crater inside me. "Can I go in?" I asked. "It is not safe," he said. "The structure is unstable. I just need to check the office." I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "It is in the stone addition in the back. It might have held." He hesitated, looking at my face. He saw something there that made him step aside. "5 minutes," he said, "and do not touch anything structural." I picked my way through the wreckage. My boots squelched in the black sludge. I walked past the twisted metal of the mixers, now looking like tortured robots. I walked past the ovens, now just rusted boxes. I reached the back office. The stone walls had held. The roof had partially collapsed, but the heavy oak desk was still there, shielded by a fallen beam. It was soaked with water and covered in ash, but it was there. I fell to my knees in the muck. I shoved the debris aside. I clawed at the sodden rug. I found the loose floorboard. It was warped from the heat, but I pried it up with my bare hands, ignoring the splinters that dug into my skin. The safe was there. It was warm to the touch. The metal was stained with soot. I pulled it out, cradling it like a baby. I opened it. The heat had warped the seal, but the inside was dry. The leather notebook was warm, but unburned. The yellow envelope was intact. I sat there in the ruins of my life, surrounded by the smell of wet charcoal, and I opened the notebook again. I needed to read it. I needed to know the full extent of the sin that had birthed this tragedy. I turned to the page marked with a dried pressed flower. A violet. October 14th, 1982. Arthur had written. His handwriting was shaky. The ink pressed hard into the paper. I confronted Agnes tonight. She did not deny it. She laughed. She told me that a Vance needs ambition, and I had none. She told me the father is a man she met in the city. A man with money. A man who knows how to take what he wants. She said she is doing me a favor by giving me an heir who will not be weak like me. I read the next paragraph, and a tear slid down my cheek. Not a tear of sadness, but a tear of pure, distilled rage. I should throw her out. I should tell the world, but the shame would kill my mother. And the baby? Saoyitsing Ling. 2 hashes greater than the baby is innocent. I will raise him as my own. I will give him my name, but I will never give him my soul. That belongs to the bread. And one day, I pray God sends someone who understands the heart of this place. If Mark grows up to be like his mother, he gets nothing. I will leave it all to the one who loves the work. Arthur had known. He had known from the very beginning that he was raising a cuckoo in his nest. He had suffered the indignity of raising another man's son, a son who grew up to despise him. just to keep the peace. And how had they repaid him? Agnes had gaslighted him on his deathbed. Mark had tried to sell his legacy for gambling money. And now, they had burned his life's work to the ground because they could not have it. They thought fire destroyed things. They were wrong. Fire purifies. Fire hardens clay into brick. Fire turns iron into steel. I closed the notebook. I put the DNA test back in the envelope. I stood up. I was covered in ash. My face was black with soot. My hands were bleeding. I walked out of the ruins of Vance's heritage. The sun was rising, casting a pale, indifferent light on the devastation. A crowd had gathered behind the police tape. Neighbors, former customers. They were whispering, pointing. I saw a car parked down the block, a black luxury sedan. The window rolled down. Agnes was in the passenger seat. Mark was driving. Tiffany was in the back. They were watching. They wanted to see me broken. They wanted to see me crying in the ashes. I locked eyes with Mark. I did not cry. I did not scream. I lifted my chin. I clutched the metal box against my chest. And I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile Mark had given me at the courthouse. Returned tenfold. It was the smile of a woman who has nothing left to lose, and therefore, nothing left to fear. Mark's expression faltered. He looked at the box in my arms. He looked at my face, and for the first time, I saw the shadow of terror in his eyes. He rolled up the window and drove away, tires screeching. I watched them go. Run. I whispered to the empty street. Run as fast as you can, because I am done baking. It is time to start butchering. 2 days after the fire, I made a phone call. I did not call the police to report my suspicions about the arson. I did not call the insurance company to beg for an advance. I called Mark. Mark, I said when he answered on the third ring. His voice was guarded, tight with suspense. What do you want? Lucy? We are busy planning the Saoyu Dinghaoling. 2 dièse est supérieur à reconstruction. I ignored the lie. I am done. Mark, you win. The fire broke me. I have no money, no building, no fight left. I want to sign the papers. I want to sell the land to your developer. There was a pause. A silence so thick I could almost hear him calculating his victory. Sensible choice, he said, his tone shifting instantly to smug satisfaction. I told you, Lucy, it was inevitable. I have one condition. I said, keeping my voice trembling and weak. I want to do it formally. I want to meet with all of you. You, Agnes, and Tiffany, at the lawyer's office. I want to hand over the keys and the deed in person. I need closure, and I want you to bring the check for the $50,000. Cashier's check. Fine. Mark said, tomorrow at 10. At my attorney's office. Do not be late. And Lucy, try to clean yourself up. You look like a chimney sweep the last time I saw you. Saoyu Dinghaoling. 2. I hung up. I spent the next 24 hours preparing. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I went to the bank and withdrew the last of my savings to pay a private investigator I had hired a week ago. A man named Detective Miller, unrelated to the local sheriff, who specialized in infidelity and corporate fraud. He handed me a manila folder thick with photos and phone logs. Then, I went to a print shop. I made copies, lots of copies. At 9:55 the next morning, I walked into the conference room of Sterling and Associates. They were already there, seated on one side of a long mahogany table like a tribunal of judges. Agnes was wearing a black suit with a pearl necklace, looking every inch the grieving widow forced to clean up a mess. Mark was in a new navy suit, likely bought on credit, checking his watch. Tiffany sat next to him, scrolling on her phone, wearing a bright pink dress that clashed violently with the somber atmosphere. I sat opposite them. I placed a single leather tote bag on the floor beside me. I did not bring a lawyer. I did not need one. So, Mark said, sliding a thick stack of documents across the polished wood. The transfer of deed, the non-disclosure agreement, and here is a copy of the check. You get the real one when the ink is dry. I looked at the check. $50,000. The price of my dignity. The price of Arthur's soul. I picked up the pen, but I did not look at the paper. I looked at Tiffany. How is the baby? Tiffany? I asked softly. Tiffany looked up, annoyed. He is fine, kicking like a soccer player. Can we hurry this up? I have a nail appointment at noon. A soccer player. I mused. That is interesting, considering Mark hates sports. He has flat feet. Did you know that? It is genetic. Mark frowned. What are you talking about? Lucy? Just sign the damn paper. I ignored him. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photograph. It was an 8x10 glossy print. I slid it across the table. Face up, it was a picture taken 3 weeks ago outside a gym in the next town over. It showed Tiffany passionately kissing a man who was definitely not Mark. The man was built like a Greek god, wearing a personal trainer t-shirt. His hand was resting intimately on her pregnant belly. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a jet engine. Tiffany's face went white. Mark stared at the photo, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What is this? Mark whispered. I pulled out another document, a screenshot of a text conversation between Tiffany and Jim Brad. Brad, can't wait for the payout. Babe, once the idiot sells the bakery, we are going to Cabo. Tiffany, I know, he is so dumb. He thinks the kid is a Vance. Laughing out loud, I watched Mark's face turn a shade of purple I had never seen before. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Is this true? He screamed at Tiffany. He grabbed her arm. Is this true? Tiffany yanked her arm away. It is fake. She photoshopped it. She is crazy. Mark, do not listen to her. Agnes slammed her hand on the table. Stop it, both of you. This is a trick. She is trying to divide us. Mark, sit down. We get the money first. Then we deal with this slut. Mark hesitated. Greed warred with humiliation in his eyes. Agnes was right. The money was the priority. He sat down, breathing heavily. He glared at me. Nice try, Lucy, but you underestimate us. We are a family. We stick together. Now sign. I smiled. It was a cold, razor blade smile. Oh, Agnes, I said, turning my gaze to the matriarch. You talk so much about family, about bloodlines, about the sanctity of the Vance name. I reached into my bag again. I pulled out the old leather notebook. I placed it on the table. Agnes froze. Her eyes locked onto the book. And for the first time in 20 years, I saw genuine fear crack her porcelain mask. Where did you get that? She whispered. Arthur left it for me. I said, he hid it under the floorboards. Along with this, I pulled out the yellowed envelope. I opened it slowly, letting the suspense suffocate them. I pulled out the paternity test from 1982. I slid it to Mark. Read it. Mark, I said, read the part where it says probability of paternity. Mark picked up the paper. His hands were shaking so bad the paper rattled. He read it. He read it again. 0%. he murmured. 0. He looked up at his mother. His eyes were wide, vacant, like a child who just found out Santa Claus is dead. Mom? What is this? Agnes stood up, her composure shattering. It is a lie. Arthur was senile. That paper is a forgery. It is dated 30 years ago. Agnes, I said calmly, and Arthur's diary details everything. How you bragged about it. How you told him the real father was a rich man from the city. I leaned forward. You have no claim. Mark, you are not a Vance. You never were. The bakery was never your birthright because you are not his son. Arthur knew, and he left it to me because I was the only real family he had. Mark looked from the paper to his mother, and then to Tiffany, who was now looking at him with undisguised disgust. You mean, zou je ting haling, 2 hekje is groter dan I am broke? Tiffany asked, her voice shrill. You are not an heir? You are just, zou je ting haling, 2 hash is greater than nobody? Shut up, Mark roared. He turned on his mother. You lied to me? My whole life? You told me I was royalty in this town. You told me I was better than everyone else. I did it for you. Agnes shrieked, her voice cracking. To give you a name, to give you a future, and now you have destroyed it, I said, my voice cutting through their screaming match. You burned down the only thing that gave you that name. You committed arson. Mark, for a legacy that was not even yours. Mark collapsed into his chair, burying his head in his hands. But I was not done. I have one more thing, I said. I pulled out a tablet from my bag. I placed it on the table and pressed play. The video was grainy, taken from a cloud backup I had accessed that morning. It was from the neighbor's security camera across the alley. A camera the arsonist had missed. It showed a figure in a hoodie breaking the back window of the bakery. It showed the figure pouring gasoline. And when the figure turned to run, the hood slipped down for a split second. It was Mark, and sitting in the getaway car, clearly visible under the street lamp, was Agnes. I paused the video. The room was deathly silent. This video has already been sent to the district attorney. I leaked. It had not yet, but they did not know that. And the forensic accountant is looking into your gambling debts, Mark, and the insurance fraud you were about to commit. Agnes sank into her chair, looking suddenly very old and very small. Mark looked up at me. His eyes were red. Vet and pleading. Lucy, zou je ting haling, 2 hashes greater than please. We can work this out. I can. Zou je ting haling, 2 hashes greater than I can fix this. No. Mark, I said, standing up and gathering my things. You cannot fix this. You cannot fix Ash. I walked to the door. I paused and looked back at them. A broken man, a exposed liar, and a gold digger who had bet on the wrong horse. I am not signing anything. I said, the land is mine, the name is mine, and you? You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start practicing. I walked out of the office. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, I heard the first scream. It was Mark. A howl of pure, unadulterated despair. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I felt light. I felt weightless. The war was over. I had dropped the bomb. Now, all that was left was to watch the fallout. News travels fast in a small town, but scandal travels at the speed of light. By the time I walked out of the lawyer's office, the atmosphere in Oakbridge had shifted. It was not visible yet, like a storm front you can feel in your bones before the first drop of rain. But I knew what was coming. I had handed the evidence to the police on my way out of the building. Detective Miller, the real one, had met me in the lobby. He had taken the flash drive with the video and the copy of the diary with a grim nod. 2 hours later, the siren started. I sat in a coffee shop across the street from the Vance estate, watching through the window. It was petty, perhaps, but after 20 years of being the dutiful, silent wife, I allowed myself this one moment of spectatorship. 3 police cruisers pulled up the winding driveway, lights flashing blue and red against the manicured hedges. A moment later, Mark was led out in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of his arrogance, stripped of his suit jacket. He was wearing a t-shirt. His head hung low. Then came Agnes. She was not walking. She was being escorted, arguing with the officers, her face a mask of indignation. She pointed a finger at the sheriff, Mark's poker buddy, who was standing by his car, refusing to look at her. Even corruption has its limits when the evidence is undeniable. The neighbors were out on their lawns. Mrs. Gable, who had called me disgusting on Facebook, was now filming the arrest with her phone, live streaming the downfall of the family she had defended just yesterday. I checked my phone. The Oak Bridge Community Alliance app was exploding. Did you hear? Mark Vance arrested for arson. Agnes Vance taken in for conspiracy. They say he is not even a real Vance. DNA test leaked. The comments that had vilified me 24 hours ago were vanishing, deleted by ashamed users, replaced by a wave of shock and performative outrage. I always knew something was off about them, wrote Mrs. Gable. Poor Lucy. She must be devastated. I turned off my phone. I did not want their pity. Their support was as fickle as the wind. The next day, the headlines hit: bakery heir exposed as fraud, arson, debt, and lies. The story was everywhere. The local news channel ran the footage of the arrest on a loop. They interviewed the fire chief, who confirmed the accelerants. They interviewed the Jim Brad, who sold his story for $500 and happily confirmed that Tiffany was planning to leave Mark as soon as the check cleared. Speaking of Tiffany, she was nowhere to be found. She had packed her bags and fled the moment the police cars turned onto the street, leaving Mark to face the music alone. A warrant was out for her as an accomplice, but I doubted they would look very hard. She was just a symptom of the disease, not the root cause. The fallout was nuclear. The Vance name, once a golden ticket in this town, became synonymous with disgrace. The church where Agnes was a deaconess released a statement distancing themselves from her unchristian behavior. The country club revoked their membership. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later. At the arraignment hearing, I sat in the back row of the courtroom. Mark stood before the judge, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his pale skin. The judge read the charges: arson in the first degree, insurance fraud, conspiracy. How do you plead? The judge asked. Mark looked back at the gallery. He scanned the faces, looking for a friend, an ally. He saw no one. His poker buddies were gone. His mother was in a separate holding cell. Tiffany was gone. His eyes landed on me. For a second, I saw the old Mark, the manipulative Mark who would smile and say, "Come on, Luch, help me out." I stared back at him, my face a mask of stone. I did not blink. "Guilty," Mark whispered. A gasp went through the room. Sentencing was set for next month. He was facing 10 to 15 years. Agnes, due to her age, might get house arrest and probation, but her reputation, the only thing she truly cared about, was dead. She would spend the rest of her life as a pariah in the town she thought she ruled. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of microphones. Miss Vance? Miss Vance? Do you have a comment? Are you going to rebuild? What about the DNA test? Is it true? I stopped. I looked at the cameras. I thought about the fire. I thought about Arthur's diary. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into their small, cruel world. I am not Miss Vance, I said into the microphones, my voice clear and steady. I am Lucy, just Lucy, and the truth always rises. Just like bread, I pushed through the crowd and got into my car. I drove to the site of the bakery. It was still a mess of charred wood and caution tape. A fence had been erected around the perimeter. I stood at the gate, looking at the blackened bricks. A car pulled up behind me. It was a sleek, black town car. A man in a tailored suit stepped out. He was not a reporter. He looked like money. Miss Lucy? He asked. Saoyutsing Haling. Katu. Yes, my name is Mr. Sterling. Not the lawyer. I represent the Heritage Food Group. We read about the Saoyutsing Haling. Deux dièse supérieure à situation. We are very sorry for your loss. Thank you, I said, turning back to the ruins. We know the building is gone, he continued, but we also know that the reputation of the bread, the sourdough specifically, was legendary before this scandal. We are interested in the intellectual property, the recipes, the brand name. I looked at him. The brand name? Vance's Heritage. He said, it has a certain Saoyutsing Haling, Dva. In fame and now, Americans love a comeback story, or a tragedy. We are willing to buy the recipes and the rights to the name. How much? I asked. $2 million. He said. I looked at the charred remains of Arthur's dream. He had told me to protect it, but he had also told me that the soul of the place was the work, not the name. The name Vance was poisoned now. It belonged to Mark and Agnes and their lives. Arthur did not care about the sign on the door. He cared about the dough. I will sell you the name, I said. And the recipes? Mr. Sterling smiled. Excellent. We will draw up the papers, but I keep the land. I added, and I keep the starter, the mother dough. That stays with me. He hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. I shook his hand. $2 million. Enough to pay off every debt, enough to build something new. I looked at the pile of ash one last time. The public had judged, the court had ruled, and the market had spoken. The Vances were bankrupt, in prison, or in exile, and I was standing on a gold mine. But as I drove away, I did not feel triumphant. I felt heavy. The adrenaline of the battle was fading, replaced by the dull ache of the reality. I had won the war, but I had burned down my home to do it. The public fallout was over. Now, I had to deal with the private one. The ink on the check from Heritage Food Group was dry, but my hands still felt stained with soot. $2 million sat in a new bank account, a number so large it felt abstract, like the distance to the moon. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes. I was moving. Oakbridge was no longer my home. It was a crime scene where I happened to be the only survivor. The town had tried to pivot. Of course, the same neighbors who had shunned me now sent fruit baskets. The mayor, whose daughter never got her wedding cake, sent a handwritten apology note inviting me to tea. I threw them all in the trash. Their kindness was an apology for their own gullibility, not a genuine offering to me. I drove to the county jail one last time. I did not have to go. My therapist advised against it, but there is a specific kind of closure that can only be found in looking the monster in the eye and seeing that he is just a man. I sat in the visitation room, separated from Mark by a thick pane of plexiglass. He looked terrible. His hair was thinning, his skin sallow. He had been in for 3 weeks, awaiting transfer to a state penitentiary. He picked up the phone. He did not look angry anymore. He looked hollow. "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice crackling through the receiver. "To gloat?" "No," I said. "I came to ask you one question." He waited, his eyes dull. "Did you ever love me?" I asked. "Or was I just the labor? Was I just the hands that kneaded the dough while you played the prince?" Mark looked down at his hands that had never done a hard day's work in his life. He let out a long, shuddering breath. "I loved you, Lucy," he said quietly. "In the beginning, before the debts, before my mother got into my head. But, Sauting Howling, 2 hashes greater than it is hard to love someone when you are jealous of them." "Jealous?" I frowned. "Of me?" "You had Arthur's respect," he said, looking up. "You had his talent. I was his son, but you were his heir. I hated you for it, and I hated myself because I knew he was right." I stared at him. The narcissist had finally admitted his fragility. It was pathetic. It was tragic, and it was liberating. "Goodbye, Mark," I said. I hung up the phone. I did not look back as I walked out. I left him in his orange jumpsuit, trapped in the prison of his own making. I drove to the site of the bakery. The demolition crew was there. The charred skeleton of Vance's heritage was being pulled down, brick by brick. Agnes had been released on bail pending her trial, but she had not been seen. Rumor had it she was hiding in her sister's house in Florida, selling her jewelry to pay her legal fees. The Vance estate was in foreclosure. I stood by the fence and watched the bulldozer knock down the wall of the kitchen. The dust rose up, a gray cloud against the blue sky. Sarah and Ben were there, standing beside me. I had given them each a severance check of $10,000, a fraction of the buyout, but enough to change their lives. "It is really gone," Sarah whispered, wiping a tear. "No," I said, touching the small cooler bag at my feet. Inside was a glass jar containing the mother sourdough starter, the living culture that Arthur had begun in 1955. It had survived the fire, protected in the walk-in fridge that had miraculously held its seal. "The building is gone," I said. "The soul is right here." I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not happiness. It was lighter than that. It was relief. The crushing weight of the Vance legacy, the burden of the secrets, the toxicity of the lies. It was all gone. I was 42 years old. I was single. I was wealthy. And for the first time in my life, I did not have to answer to anyone. But as I drove away from Oakbridge for the last time, watching the Welcome to Oakbridge sign fade in my rearview mirror, I felt the phantom pain. You cannot cut off a limb without a scar. You cannot spend 20 years loving the wrong people without losing a part of yourself. I had won, yes, but I was also the casualty. I touched the passenger seat where the jar of starter sat, buckled in. "We are going to be okay," I whispered to the yeast. "We are going to rise again, but this time, we would do it on my terms. No secrets, no lies, just flour, water, and salt." The road ahead was long and open. I turned on the radio. For the first time in months, the music did not sound like noise. It sounded like a soundtrack for a beginning. 6 months is enough time for the seasons to change. It is enough time for a broken bone to knit back together, though the ache remains when it rains. And it is certainly enough time for a scandal to be replaced by the next big headline. I stood on the sidewalk of a busy street in the West Village of New York City. The air here smelled different than Oak Bridge. It smelled of exhaust, roasting nuts from a street cart, and the electric hum of millions of people living anonymous lives. There were no homeowners associations here, no neighbors watching from behind lace curtains. Above me, the neon sign flickered to life against the twilight. It did not say Vance's heritage. It read, in simple, elegant white script, Lucy's beginning. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. This bakery was small. It did not have industrial ovens capable of churning out 500 loaves a day. It had a single stone hearth and a display case that held only what I felt like baking that morning. I walked to the counter and picked up the magazine that was lying there. It was a culinary trade publication. On the back cover was a glossy advertisement. It showed a perfectly golden loaf of sourdough bread, wrapped in plastic, sitting in a freezer case. The label read, Vance's Heritage, the authentic taste of tradition, now available in your grocer's freezer. I smiled. It was the ultimate revenge. I had sold the recipe, the sacred, secret family formula that Agnes and Mark had worshipped like a deity, to the Heritage Food Group. They had mass-produced it. They had turned the exclusive, elitist Vance bread into a $3 commodity that anyone could buy at a gas station. I had commodified their ego and cashed the check. With that money, I had bought this small shop, but I had done something else. 2. I walked to the back of the shop, where a group of 4 women were washing up. They were wearing white aprons, embroidered with the logo of my new nonprofit, the Second Rise Foundation. These women were not professional bakers. One was a survivor of domestic violence who had fled her husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. Another was a single mother who had been evicted 2 months ago. I paid them a living wage to learn a trade, to find their footing, to realize that they were not defined by the people who had hurt them. Good night, Lucy, one of them said, smiling tiredly. See you tomorrow. Good night, Maria, I said. I locked the door behind them. I went to the back office. It was clean. There were no secrets under these floorboards. On my desk sat a letter. The return address was the State Correctional Facility. It was from inmate number 7429. Mark. It had arrived 3 days ago. I had not opened it. I picked up the envelope. I ran my thumb over the cheap paper. I imagined him sitting in his cell, writing it. I imagined he was asking for forgiveness, or perhaps asking for money for the commissary. I imagined he was telling me how much he missed the smell of the starter. I walked over to the shredder. I did not need to know what he had to say. His voice was no longer the narrator of my life. I fed the unopened letter into the machine, the blade's word, slicing his words into thin, unintelligible strips of confetti. I had heard through the grapevine that Agnes was living in a studio apartment in Florida, working as a greeter at a discount department store. The woman who had once refused to be seen in anything but silk was now wearing a polyester vest and smiling at tourists for minimum wage. It was a fate worse than prison for a woman like her. Tiffany had vanished into the ether, likely finding another Mark in another town. I was the only one left standing. I took the jar of sourdough starter out of the fridge. The culture was bubbling, alive and hungry. It was the same culture Arthur had started, but it had changed. It had adapted to the water in the city. the wild yeast in the air. It tasted different now, sharper, stronger. I dipped my finger in and tasted it. Sour, tangy, complex. I was wealthy. I was free. I was successful. But as I turned off the lights and walked out into the cool night air, I flinched when a taxi honked its horn. My heart rate spiked, my body bracing for a fight that was not there. The money could fix the bakery. It could not fix the nervous system. I pulled my coat tighter around myself. I was not the naive woman who thought love was enough to save a broken man. I was not the victim who let a family of wolves eat at her table. I was a scar, tougher than the skin that surrounded it, but forever marked by the cut. I walked down the street, merging into the crowd of strangers. I was alone, but for the first time in 20 years, the silence in my head was not empty. It was peaceful, and that was enough.